All right, welcome everybody. I'm Jim Wiley. I am a volunteer leader with the Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter. I'm the chair of the Dirty Energy team, and today we are hosting some speakers from the Rocky Mountain Institute. They're going to talk to us about how we have figured out this whole fugitive methane gas leak thing, and we've got nothing to worry about. Um, or maybe not. So let me start. So first of all, a little housekeeping. Please keep yourself on mute as we're talking. Feel free to put any questions in the chat, but we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A after Kevin gives his presentation as well. So Kevin Gauthier, I should have asked how you pronounce your name, is a geoscience advisor on climate intelligence program at the Rocky Mountain Institute. And welcome, Kevin. Please tell us what you're up to.
Thanks, Jim, for the introduction. I appreciate it. Yeah, Kevin Gauthier. My father's from Boston, so kind of pronounce it that way, but it's French. Really nice to meet you all. Yeah, I'm currently a geoscience advisor at RMI. My background by education is geology, and then I spent a decade in the oil and gas industry in the GNG, geology and geophysics space, and then by extension, geoscience in general. We kind of dabble in all of it. So that's my background, and I've been at RMI for about 5 years now, on a team that really focuses on oil and gas solutions. And lately, a lot of the conversation has been about methane. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. Of course, at RMI, we're a pretty big group. We have other teams that focus on different aspects of the methane story, landfills, etc. But today, I'm just really going to focus my conversation about what oil and gas has a contribution and interplays there. So that's me. I want to give a chance for my colleagues, of course, to introduce themselves. Kayla, you want to go next?
Yeah, howdy everyone. I am a manager on our states team. I focus on policy solutions to methane emissions in the oil and gas sector. I am a lawyer by training, so come from a different world than Kevin, and I've been at RMI for about a year and a half. And I'll kick it over to Chad.
Kayla, you need to start saying almost 2 years, don't you? Because I need to start saying a year and a half at RMI. Crazy. But yeah, nice to meet everyone. I am an associate on Kayla's team, and I've recently become our sort of state policy strategy lead for Pennsylvania oil and gas methane issues. So really looking forward to getting into this conversation. I am definitely newer to RMI and the methane world. Like I said, I'm coming up on a year and a half at RMI, and that when I first started, that was my introduction to methane. So Kevin is definitely the the big time subject matter expert in the room, and we appreciate his expertise. Look forward to his presentation.
Thanks, Chad. Appreciate it. And we're all grasshoppers in this. We're all learning as we go. So bear with us. So what I want to present to you today is about stopping gas loss related to oil and gas. I'm going to be touching on a recent report I put out as a lead author, and then also I'm going to be speaking to another briefer report that we put out about 2 months ago now. Both of them help tell pieces of the story, and in the chat, we'll drop the URLs to both of these articles for you. But I'll talk about them using PowerPoint to point things out. I think it's a helpful way. I hope to spend no more than about half an hour to go through this and give tons of time for Q&A. But this is a smaller group, and if the group stays this size, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll try to address them along the way. Or if you do have a burning question, I don't want you to feel left behind, so do unmute yourself. If you have any problems hearing me or seeing my screen, do of course let me know. The point of this is for you to have the information. I do want to throw out one thing too, a bit of a safe harbor statement. I'm going to make some comparisons to emission volumes that we're seeing today due to some global security issues that are happening. Of course, next week is these things continue, volumes of
Hi,
impact change.
sorry.
So some of the comparisons I'll make, I'll let you know the date range I'm looking at, but I just want to say that up front. With all that said, I'm just going to jump right in. So the main purpose of today is to give you an overview of my most recent work that talks about global energy security, waste that we have control of that can help mitigate some of these impacts, and of course, how climate security can come with that. Um, that article is named Stopping Global Gas Loss in Its Tracks, and the URL's there, but you don't need to memorize that. We'll put it in the chat for you. So some of the key things I want to convey to you all today are, number one, the amount of methane, which is the key component of natural gas. So the main thing that you're using when you burn methane is a source of energy. The amount of methane that is leaked by global oil and gas industry operations is larger, more than 2x the amount of gas that passes through, is a liquefied form, passes through the Strait of Hormuz, right? So from the ongoing war, if you think about all the disruption it's having, the amount that we waste is more than 2x of that, right? And those numbers are based off how much gas passed through the Strait of Hormuz last year and a very recent report on waste, right? So these are very empirical measurements of information that we have that say one is larger than the other, and the amount of disruption to have now is dwarfed by things that we have fully in our control. The second thing I'll talk about is reducing inefficiencies, how that can bolster energy security. You're probably putting the pieces together now that if we can manage waste at home, the impact can be very large compared to things that are disrupted today. Third thing I'll talk about is that if we waste less, there's money to be made in terms of revenue from that resource. But it also, by wasting less, we boost security. And of course, getting to the fourth point here is that if we waste less, then we're going to improve climate security, not only geopolitical revenue security, but the climate as well. I'm going to give you an overview of a case study we performed in Texas, which puts a magnifying glass to what is going on around waste within the state in the oil and gas realm. And we show you what we uncovered, and it gives us food for thought about how these approaches to understand what is being wasted, by measuring them and quantifying them, it gives us a picture of what we can do at home and where we can do things at home, right? And then six, I'll kind of circle back to how that one example domestically, if you tie it to global issues that are happening, it gives us an area of focus. So I'll go through that order of operations. But again, please drop questions in the chat along the way. If it's a very burning question, let me know, but otherwise we'll leave time for Q&A. So first thing, let's talk about inefficiencies within the oil and gas system. I was at a few conferences recently, and the global trend is this, that it's said pretty plainly that the oil and gas industry has a lot of inefficiencies. I've heard a lot of CEOs and C-levels and managers in oil and gas companies say this out loud. They raise their hand and say, yeah, we're pretty inefficient. We have room to grow. I've heard it said different ways. So it's coming out of their mouths, but we also see it, which is something gives us focus to act. So what I'm showing you here is an example of how we can see some of it. This is using satellite data that measures the amount of methane being emitted in large quantities. This is being wasted, vented directly to the atmosphere, which has a number of impacts. But in the economic sense, this is wasted revenue just going out the pipe. In a health aspect, this is going into our climate, has impacts on local populations and global, and of course, it has climate impacts. We can see this type of waste a number of ways now, and it's increasingly more visible. And again, the industry acknowledges this visibility. So I spoke about satellites, which is the image in the middle. I'll talk about it in a little more detail. Sensors are becoming more advanced. The approaches to using sensors to understand where waste is happening is becoming more common, more advanced, and getting creative. Operators are very good now at finding ways to really understand where waste is occurring. So it's not like this is new. They're really sharpening their pencils on doing this. And continuous monitoring, kind of going with sensor improvement, but monitoring it in different ways continuously. There's so many measurements, and the access to different computing systems helps us all process that. So in the middle is an example of a satellite detecting a methane plume in Texas. If you look at this image on the date ranges at the bottom, these are two dates that this was observed. The top one being Feb 16 of this year and one being 2019. What's interesting about this size of this leak, like to quantify it, every 2 days, for example, if this was leaking continuously for 2 days, that's over 300,000 dryer loads. So if you have a gas dryer at home and you're running that, You could run that 330,000 times with the amount of gas that just escaped into the atmosphere, right? And that's completely wasted. Now, this is Texas, and the price of this is borne directly on those folks, but globally it doesn't impact us at all, right? So that's 2026. That's one leak, and hopefully that analog gave some understanding of the size of this, but it's quite large. Another way to think of it is that every hour this leaked, probably a block of houses within a neighborhood would have received the amount of gas they need for an entire year. That's all appliances, heating, cooking, all the things, if you're using that. So that's interesting because that's 2026. We performed our analysis in Texas to really put a magnifying lens to what's going on. And what's interesting was in our 2024 analysis, we saw that the county that this leak was occurring in was very wasteful even at that time, 2024. So it shows that the system inefficiencies are persisting. We can see them. So pretty much everyone knows about this. And we can show that there's trends in this kind of waste, right? And without action, they will continue to persist. You can see dates of 2019 on the screen, an analysis of 2024, data from 2026. You can probably paint the picture for yourself that things don't just magically resolve, right? These kind of issues are persistent. They can be seen. They're inefficiencies at the end of the day. So I'll talk more about the image on the right, but the key takeaways within the analysis, one county of a state is the same place that this kind of wasteful practice is happening today. So we probably know that economics drives waste just natively, but the data is quite clear and supports that. So wasted resource, that's wasted revenue that we can make off the resource. And of course, this wasted energy. The analogs I gave you were for energy, right? Running a dryer, running your house, doing kind of things. At the end of the day, energy is what people need, and clean energy is where we need to be moving. A way to get to clean energy is low emission energy, right? Emitting as little waste as possible that will have impacts on the globe and the environment. So in terms of economics, the data is really clear. This is all publicly available information from the Energy Information Agency, the EIA in the US, pretty reputable source. And what the data shows is that when the prices are high, which is the orange line, this is a sale price, and I'll talk about it. So when the prices go up, the amount of waste goes down. The blue line is an indicator of waste. The blue line is a measure of how much natural gas is vented or flared, two ways that the oil and gas industry waste product. The blue line is an indicator of how much waste is happening through those two methods. When it's high, there's more of it. When it's low, there's less of it. So you can kind of see a flip-flop of it. So the data is very clear that the economics drive this. Again, that native intuition is supported by data here. and put that into volumes, 81 million metric tons are wasted from venting and flaring. That was 2025. So this is recent data brought in by another source. This is the IE, International Energy Agency, put that number out. So it just shows that there's a lot of waste happening and we know it's economically driven. And if you quantify that, that's 20 to 50 billion dollars. If you were going to buy gas yourself, that's the cost of this wasted resource, right? Now, the reason for the big range there is pricing varies depending on where you're at, right? We all know not only pricing at the pump, but pricing at large hubs that purchase and sell gas also have fluctuations. So that's the range, right? 20 to 50 billion is a lot of money. If you think of the fall through in taxes, it's also quite large. We'll talk about that too. The units here in the blue are volumes. And in the orange, these are prices that you would pay if you purchased from a large hub. And the way they sell this product, which is natural gas, is the heating coefficient. So the amount of heat that gas can provide, they'll put a dollar amount to it. So for a million BTUs of heat, $3-4 is common. And that's at the Henry Hub in the southeast coast of the US. So continuing, so methane, we spoke about methane being wasted. Everyone talks about this. Everyone knows it's happening. We spoke about the financial impact in terms of revenue, but let's talk about the science behind it. I really like to use a figure like this to describe how the greenhouse gas effect is happening and why methane is important in this conversation. This this analog I'm going to show you, this subject really relates to all methane. So what I talk about here, think about it for all methane. So methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's 80 times carbon dioxide. You may have heard that, right? Over the lifespan, it sits within the climate. It's 80 times more potent in terms of the blanket effect or the greenhouse gas effect. So what's happening scientifically, if you look at it, I want to use this image because I think it's quite important, is the sun radiates energy, right? And so that's short wavelength energy that hits the surface of the earth. Now, some of that energy is reflected by clouds, by the oceans, but a lot of it gets absorbed by the earth and re-radiated back out. So that wavelength of energy that's radiated back out is different. It's longer wavelength. And in the brackets at the bottom, I show my sources, but I talk about short wavelength out, long wavelength up. So that energy gets re-radiated back out. Some of that energy gets trapped, gets reflected again off clouds. Some of that energy escapes. So that's what the long red, long orange arrow, wiggly arrow shows. But the other energy, what it does is it interacts with greenhouse gases. So if you've heard the word greenhouse gases, this is what it is. So a greenhouse gas is any molecule that interacts with this long wavelength energy. At a molecular level, it interacts, and when it interacts, it does something. It re-radiates back. So a greenhouse gas is any molecule that interacts with this energy that tries to escape our atmosphere and re-radiates it. Methane is a bit scary because of its molecular shape, it is so good at re-interacting with this long wavelength radiation that it has this warming effect. So if you're looking at this image and you see these little orange arrows, and then you see another one coming off, this is an indicator of what the greenhouse gas effect is doing. What's happening is the long wavelength energy is interacting with these molecules, and that molecule re-radiates energy. Now, the reason why these arrows are going in all directions is because it is pretty much random. The problem we have is about half the time that random arrow direction's down, and that downward is a heating effect, right? So this is what a greenhouse gas is. It's a molecule that interacts with this energy. And again, methane, because of its shape, molecular shape, interacts with it at such a large magnitude that it has an 80x warming effect. So hopefully this provides some clarity of what's going on, and maybe it's a different lens of looking at it, but I find it helpful. So that's why it's important to really focus on methane, because it is so much more intense of its greenhouse gas effect that every ton we can mitigate on methane has an outsized impact on what it does to the climate, right? Compared to other greenhouse gases, which is why it's been a big focus. It's not just a buzz. Scientifically, it matters a lot. And the fastest way of having a positive impact on our planet and the environment on the oil and gas side is really focusing on methane, because the oil and gas industry is a major source of methane. And if we can really focus on reducing any kind of loss, we have a big impact, right? So that's the point of all this. Why is methane important? Well, this kind of image and this story is the reasoning behind. I have more information to show later on if you're interested. So we've spoken about the amount of waste and the global impact we're seeing from non-movement of a resource, liquefied natural gas, right? We did a case study in Texas, and I'll dive into that because I'll connect how actions we take domestically have an impact on that global setting. So also, we're going to drop a URL to you, but this is another brief that we put out, like I said, a few months ago, that talks about that case analysis of waste within Texas. So some of the key highlights before I talk about it in more detail are that within the state of Texas in 2024, we analyzed 12 months of data. We found that the amount of waste that's occurring is 3 to 4.5 times what operators are telling the state, right? So we're finding that the amount of waste is not only scary in terms of being reported by them, but it's much larger than what they're actually reporting. So we can put a magnifying glass and see that. What we find within the state of Texas, which is dominated, it has a lot of oil and gas operations. It is the largest producing state in the country. And what we find is that oil production, so that is a lease or a plot of land that has wells on it that produces both oil and natural gas. When they're dominantly producing oil, we find that they waste a lot of gas. We find that the smaller oil producers waste more gas, an outsized amount of gas compared to the larger oil and gas operators. When I say large, I mean producing a lot of oil, right? So producing 20,000 barrels of oil a day compared to producing 20 barrels of oil a day. The one that produces less oil by ratio is wasting a lot of gas. We find that gas wells within the state of Texas, ones that predominantly produce gas, tend to waste less. And this is driven by that economic equation, right? They have the equipment in place. They can get the gas into the pipe and sell it to market and try to waste as little as possible because for them, there's money to be made. The flip side is true for the oil operators, right? There's not money to be made in their eyes at all times. So they might waste more of the gas and really focus on the other product they're trying to produce. And that wasteful practice has an impact. And number five, like this has impact to us all. So I'm going to connect and I'm going to describe like the global situation. But if you were a Texas resident, the amount of money that is being thrown out, being vented direct atmosphere, is no small amount, right? In the hundreds of millions of dollars, $100 million range of tax revenue fall through. And if you equated that to revenue that operators can make, if you're trying to have a conversation and operators like, well, we waste, but it's not really something we can address. Well, the amount of revenue is in the billion-dollar range, right? So it's a large amount of money being thrown out and wasted in terms of revenue for them and taxpayer fall through that can have a really positive impact on residents within the state. So this is the kind of key takeaway of the findings from that analysis we performed within the state of Texas from 2024. Let's start with the graph on the left. So what we found was the yellow and the red, 118 and 2, these bars represent the height, the magnitude of the amount of waste they told the state about. So if you're an operator in Texas, you told the state, hey, we waste about 120 billion cubic feet of natural gas a year. And a dominant contributor of natural gas is methane. About 75% in the state of Texas on average is methane. So if you had 100 molecules, 74, 75 of them are going to be that methane molecule. So they told the state they wasted about 120 billion cubic feet of this. The analysis shows all the teals, or the purplish and the teals, on top of that. So 101 extra billion cubic feet is probably probably flared. And then on top of that, the teals, hundreds more billion cubic feet are vented directly to the atmosphere. If you add all of this up, the height of all the bars is about 551 billion cubic feet of gas. That's a lot of gas, and I'll talk about what that means in terms of money in a second. But before we go there, this analysis we performed in Texas, the methodology we built, and the findings we arrived at seem to be validated by other studies. So on the table on the right are just some comparisons to other studies that look at the amount of waste in either like a smaller area of Texas or the whole state. And we compared to both of those. We try to do an apples to apples comparison in all cases. The far right column talks about the methane loss. Again, the key component of natural gas is methane. So losing 3% of your methane per the total volume in barrel of oil equivalents that you produced. 3%, you'll see the common number there. And within the full state of Texas, or you'll see that's about 3.95% of methane is wasted through venting and flaring and very wasteful practices related to that in upstream oil and gas. And when you compare that to other methods, we're still in the same order of magnitude, and we're slightly higher. And then if you look really focused on the Permian Basin is prolific within Texas. It's very well studied. There's a lot of information to be had, and we compare it there. And what we see is that we find the amount of waste actually slightly lower than what some others are finding. But what's disturbing is that this analysis looked at everything within the state. Every stone was turned over. And the disturbing piece is that we find waste overall is larger, and we find within the Permian is lower. So what that means is the what's making up for that waste is outside of the Permian. So areas that are not very well studied are more wasteful than I think a lot of people are seeing. That is what our analysis is also showing with this. So this kind of magnifying glass, this methodology, what our analysis shows disturbing trends. One is we're wasting more than what operators say. Two is this new type of methodology to quantify that corroborates. And three, in areas that don't generally get a lot of it's not as sexy, don't get as much press, don't get as much analysis performed, are probably more wasteful than we know. So all of these points of information, again, really build the story about waste is rampant, waste is pervasive, everyone knows it's happening, and they're probably underreporting it. Right? So that is what this analysis showed. And another way to look at that, not just with bars, but geographic distribution of where the waste is occurring, is this. And by having that data on hand, every stone returned, right, you can look at this by county, right? Within the state of Texas, that's what this map shows. And it helps because it shows what inefficiencies really are and where you can act. If you're a resident, per se, if you put yourself in the shoes, just for the purpose of this experiment, put yourself in the shoes of a yellow county, and then also put your shoes in a county that's purple, like right next to it, right? For example, here or here, like why is the operation going on in your county so wasteful compared to your neighbors? That's revenue loss, that's taxpayer money loss, that's environmental impact up, all that kind of stuff, right? So that is a way we can look at this data to inform where we can act. Some key highlights from that Texas analysis, just to add on what I've already said, is that about 50% of the oil dominant operators within the state said at least 1 month in the year they produce zero gas, which from a geoscience perspective is not really plausible in this part of the world. If you're producing fluid out of the ground, a hydrocarbon slurry, if you have it, some of that's going to be gas, some of it's going to be oil, some of it's going to be heavier hydrocarbons that have CH molecules within the molecular makeup. Those are organic compounds, and right. So those are going to be coming out of the ground together. So if you're producing just oil and you say you produce no gas, it's not really possible in this part of the world. So what we found is that a lot of these operators are just saying they produce none of it. Don't worry about me. Next month maybe, but we didn't produce any gas this month. So I spoke about pricing. Here's some information around that. So what we've seen is that if you take the aggregate of what you're looking at on the screen and you said, okay, how much is that worth? If you looked at 2024 pricing, that's about $1 billion. Top last lost tax revenue, $100 million range. And if you equated that to today's pricing for gas, earlier you saw it's volatile. We all know it's very volatile. So if you equated the gas value here, it's over $1.5 billion. So that's if this was brought to a port in Louisiana and sold, that's the amount they could fetch. So this is the last slide I have, and I do want to, like I said, field any questions and go back to all these. But the industry is saying that they want to have better data. They want to act. The global energy environment, the security environment we have is poor, right? And we know that. You can watch the news, all kinds of things. So we know that energy security is important. We know that it has impacts on economic security. We know that it has impacts on climate security. So like taking action at home, domestically, right? Just looking at Texas, that analog shows that we can address what's going on globally if we take action domestically. And at the time of this publication, the first bullet here, the volume of gas in Texas that was wasted, if you take 8 weeks of war, they're the same number. So just acting in Texas alone up till May 4, we're past that date now, of course, but they were equitable. The amount of gas that wasn't moving through the Strait of Hormuz was the amount of gas wasted in this one time period. So it shows that like these aren't just like that would be nice. It's if you take action, it equates to this large global disruption we're having. So actions domestically have a huge impact, right? And just some quotes, like at CERAWeek, which is like Super Bowl of energy, CEO, Saudi Aramco, ExxonMobil, these kinds of players are all there, and that level of management and speakers are there. They say this, right? So, and they say they want better data. They say they want to be more efficient, less inefficient, and make more revenue. And we want the climate impact. So that's what they're saying, and that's what the purpose of putting this out there. And of course, presenting to you today, make sure that the story is understood and everyone gets a chance to talk about it and ask questions about it. The image on the bottom right here is just that comparison I made earlier. The bottom teal is the amount of liquefied natural gas that moved through the Strait of Hormuz in 2024. This number is very similar to the 2025 number. And the dark blue line above it is the amount of gas that is wasted just by the oil and gas industry alone every year from venting and flaring. you can see it's already a 2x, but it just shows that there's opportunity only within one sector to make a difference. So that is the story that we're trying to convey and the data that we have behind it. So I'll stop there. Let me see what questions are in the chat, and I open it up to some conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Maybe before we get into discussion, I wonder if you could walk through a couple of RMI web pages that I thought were great jump pages, like the method transparency page, which takes us to um, the overall methane page,
Yeah, let me get to that.
so that people know what tools they can go to on the RMI site.
Yeah, let me get them out in order for you guys here. Cool. So let me share my browser with you all. Hopefully you can see that now. So thanks, Jim. Good segue there. So yeah, so a real key focus for RMI is methane across different sectors. Hopefully I presented the message in a clear way of why methane is such an important focus. We do have a page that's just dedicated to methane and the different focuses we have, not only on the oil and gas sector, but other sectors. And this is that page. Just go to rmi.org/methane. You'll find about it. And then you can find links to areas of focus. Oil and gas is my bread and butter, but also landfills, marginal wells, and having more transparency into that. So these are all there. I am not an expert outside of my wheelhouse, so I defer to questions that might come in here that might go to a different team. We'll take note and we'll circle back. But these are the areas you can think about. And then from today, what I spoke about and provided URL was this article that summarizes the global interplay of energy security, climate security, resource economic security, right? All of those pieces to domestic observations, what we can quantify, actions we can take, areas we can focus on, all that stuff. And then the other piece I related to was the case study within Texas, and that is this article. If you find yourself here, those get you to what I was describing. And accompanying this article, this brief, is a detailed methodology of how we got there. And we made that publicly available, of course, for free for others to be able to recreate, question, reproduce themselves and use. Um, I hope those sites are helpful. Jim, is that what you wanted to see? Anything else specific, or should we open it up for more Q&A? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry about that. I really like the methane transparency page. It's very sexy, built from the bottom up. Yeah.
And while I load that, I'm going to look at the questions and answer questions in the chat.
Yeah, Kevin, I've been answering some of them as they came in. We did have one question that I don't think we fully dug into, which is when you guys were doing this analysis, how exactly did you determine that the waste that was actually occurring was higher than the waste that was reported? So if you could dig into kind of how you were comparing across sort of analogous operations, I think that might be
Definitely.
helpful.
Yeah, and I think Chris had this question, but yeah, hopefully if it spurs other questions, you guys jump in. So focusing on Texas, when you're an operator and you produce hydrocarbons out of the ground, when you produce this resource, you're producing oil, you're producing gas that come out of the ground together. Different operations are going to really focus on oil, different operations are going to focus on gas, but you kind of get the picture, right? It comes out of the ground. They tell the state about what they're doing every month within a year. They tell them how much they're producing. They tell the state how much they're selling. They tell the state how much they have to flare for safety reasons or other reasons. They tell the state how much they waste themselves. And if you build a collage, think of it like building a puzzle of the entire state of Texas, you get an image of the data they provide. And baked within that data, there's going to be realistic reporting. There's also going to be unrealistic reporting. So what we do is with that puzzle, we can kind of go through it with a comb using basic geoscience principles and say, okay, what you're reporting is physically plausible. let's call that reliable data. And then you can look at the neighbor, and the neighbor says, hey, I'm actually not producing any gas. Don't worry about me. But it's quite interesting because they're drilling into the same reservoir as their next door neighbor who is reporting gas, right, or oil. So you can use the data and use basic geoscience principles to say, okay, I trust this data. I don't have trust fully in that data. And then if you build that, if you do that study and you build it up to the entire state, you have a data set that has some reliable data and has probably unreported, underreported, unreliable data, really, not trustworthy. So then based off that, what you can do is you can make inferences on what an operator probably is producing in terms of gas based off whether it's a geographic boundary, whether it's a geologic constraint. You can build analogs to say, okay, operator two, we don't have full confidence what you're reporting. If we use a perimeter fence of all the good data around you, we actually inferred that you're probably producing 2 units of gas for every unit of oil you're producing, and therefore you're producing 500 units of gas, right? And then we could look at what they reported to the state, whether it's like 5 units, and we could say, okay, you're off by about 495 based off our analog. And then we repeat this process and we build up a collage of inferred puzzle pieces that tell the full story. So we do this, and then of course we compare it to other publicly reported, other publicly measured and modeled studies, and we got a similar answer. That was that comparison. So that is the process by which we analyze the information within the state of Texas to get that story. And yeah, so again, basic geoscience principles, what they reported, and you combine the two and you can build an inference model. How does, second question from Chris, I'll keep going. I know there's tons of questions here. Let me see what's not been answered. Second question from Chris, how does gas fracking compare with gas from conventional wells? Chris, good question. I don't believe this has been answered, but I'll jump in. So if you're fracturing a well, it's a geoscience technique essentially to increase permeability and porosity of a rock, mostly permeability. So think you have a sponge. How do you get those little vesicles that within the sponge talk to the next one, talk to the next one, and get into your well, right? So you're cracking it. You're providing hydraulic principles to create microfractures that increase the permeability. So if you have a gas that is a fracked well, it's going to produce, if you're producing a resource per se, you're going to have more gas that comes out of the ground because of what you've done. You're also, in this state of Texas, is going to get oil that comes out of the ground with your gas. So you're still producing both. So we do consider these types of wells in terms of if the gas to oil ratio is higher because of the operational type, we do consider that as well. So to answer your question, if you're fracturing, you're probably going to get a higher yield of gas, but there are still geoscience relationships that hold true, and you can think about.
But
Chris,
Kevin,
yes.
can I just jump in?
Yes.
I interpreted Chris's question is fracking inherently more leaky than conventional methods?
Can be. So remember, it's an operator producing a resource. So if they're producing out of the ground and they don't have the infrastructure to capture that gas and move it to market, then they're going to be very leaky. But if they do have all the infrastructure there, they may be less leaky. So it depends on a coupling of what you're doing subsurface, and then on the surface, what are you doing? So to answer your question, it depends. Depends on what the operator is doing. Are they actually trying to capture it and recoup the resource, or they're not? Kayla, your hand's raised.
Yeah, another nuance to this, and again, we've not dug as deeply into the data in Pennsylvania, especially not an analysis similar to this. But I'm pretty sure that most of the conventional wells in Pennsylvania at this point are marginal. And we do have some indication from Texas that these marginal low producing wells can be leakier. So that's not a function of like whether it was convention or whether it was fracked. It's more a feature of these older, low producing wells sort of tending to be a little bit leakier. So that's another nuance that could play into the answer here. And again, I don't think anybody's done a deep analysis of exactly this question in Pennsylvania, but I think that it trends in that direction. Of course, if you had two wells side by side that were the same age and the same sort of operational status, then that might be different, but that is one feature of Pennsylvania.
But just to add on to that too, think if you have a marginal well operation. So say you're a landowner, it doesn't matter any state, and you have a well on your property that's marginal, so it produces a little bit. It means it's also producing a little bit of revenue. it costs money to put the proper equipment on top of that well to make sure all the product moves to market, is not flared. You don't have old valves, flanges, compressors that would allow any leaking to occur. So it's really an economics conversation too. If you think about it that way, that builds as to why Kayla's statement seems to hold true. But again, we've not analyzed it in a way that I can make a full statement in Pennsylvania. I'm going to move on to the next question for time. So got a little laggy on my side. Not sure what's going on. But Chris, you're asking a lot of good questions. You're talking about waste of the wellhead. What about waste from the sewage treatment? Correct. Everything I've spoken about today is talking about from the subsurface, getting the resource out of the ground and moving it to a place where it can be sold. It's just talking about that piece of the chain of getting our energy, getting resource out of the ground and providing energy to you, an end user. So that's what I spoke about. And those volumes of waste are just for that piece of the puzzle. So hopefully that answer shows like the magnitude of the problem and also like where I was speaking about. Again, I can't comment about the waste from the sewage treatment piece. We can take your questions though for some colleagues. Second question you have, I'm assuming you're talking about the former, right? The oil and gas. Texas is an example of what oil and gas operations are globally, and it is a leading example in terms of the technology being employed there. So I would assume, yes, that some of the findings that we've observed in Texas, there are going to be analogs elsewhere, but there's also going to be differences in terms of the technologies they're using, right? So consider that. I hope that answer helps shine some light into what you asked. But yes, I believe wholeheartedly. Yes, it's going to be there. I'm scrolling down now. Do interrupt though if I didn't fully answer your question. Michael Vidamo, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, excuse me if I butchered that. If a company is that wastes the most not selling methane, how can they be influenced to waste less? Are there legal strategies? So what we wanted to do, and not only the article where we provide similarities between the amount of waste that's the amount of product, the resource that's tied up due to a war, compared to the waste we have, right? How can a company be convinced to waste less? Well, again, we're presenting like the economic case, like how much money is being missed out on, not only for an operator, but the the impacted stakeholders, the taxpayers, right, that actually should get a cut and that can benefit their community of operations happening. So that's the economic piece. I spoke about the climate piece, about oil and gas is a main source of methane, right? And that the potency of methane is much larger than other greenhouse gases. So that's another piece. But we believe leading with economics is the way for industry to change their mind. Like if there's no money behind it, we don't really see movement a lot of the time. So that's why really the main focus was the economic piece. Go ahead, Caleb.
Yeah, I'll chime in on this. Well, with legal strategies, I mean, you could be referring there to legislation or regulation, or to like sort of actual legal strategies, more like a litigation posture. And I think that the next question from Jerry goes to this as well. Um, in the litigation sphere, RMI does not litigate. That's not our lane. So if like there are probably other groups that are better situated than us to think about or answer questions about litigation strategies that might be relevant in this space. What we can speak to are what policies have been passed and like how regulators and policymakers can think about strategies to reduce this waste. Under the Biden administration, there was a lot of action taken on methane. So they passed the Quado regulations, which were going to require that states implement methane regulations in the oil and gas sector. If anybody's familiar with the Clean Air Act, this would have been like a state implementation plan. So this is a world in which the EPA sets a floor and then states have to sort of meet that floor. The Trump administration has rolled back a little some of the technical requirements under Quado, and they've extended the deadlines. The other thing that happened under Biden that has also been postponed was a waste emissions charge. So there was going to be a fee levied against oil and gas operators who were emitting methane in excess of a certain target. So a lot of the operators that Kevin has talked about probably would have exceeded that target and therefore would have had a fee levied against them. That has been postponed out to 2034 under the Trump administration. So there have been policy solutions put forward that could directly target waste of this type. Um, we do not see there is action still happening in this space. It is not just that we're not seeing a lot of federal action, but there are states that are choosing to continue and to pass strong, ambitious policies on methane. There's a lot of really interesting progress happening in Colorado. That's a great leader state to look to if you're interested in understanding what states have done to try and reduce these methane emissions.
Thanks, Kayla. Alan, you asked a few pretty good questions here, so I want to add more context and maybe more answers to what you asked outside of what Kayla and Chris or Kayla's mentioned. So you say, can you mention gas losses from pipeline systems, local gas distributions, and gas generation? I'm going to talk about the getting gas out of the ground and transmitting it to a place that end users are going to need to purchase it, right? So when you bring a resource out of the ground, so it's natural gas, again, what you're bringing out of the ground is a slurry of molecules. Some of them are organic, some are inorganic. So there are going to be um, some of them like that are carcinogens, some of them that are not hydrocarbons like CO2, but you're going to get a slurry of molecules coming out of the ground. If you're dominantly producing gas, what you'll do at the wellhead is you will take that gas, you will separate out the liquids out of it, and you're going to try to transmit that gas. There are many models out there. So there's empirical evidence that shows this system has fugitive leaking. So there's just naturally leaking that occurs with pretty much all systems. That happens at flanges, at compressors. So if you're going to move gas, you're going to compress it to send it down a pipeline. Nettle has put out some recent reports in the past year that talk about assumptions of how often you have to recompress that gas to keep moving it down the pipeline. They say about every 90 miles, you have to have a compressor station. It is well documented that compressing stations are sources of leaks and fugitives. Sorry, not venting, but leaks and fugitives. So what that means is the natural operation of running a compressor will be leaky, right? And it's going to leak natural gas. And the main component of natural gas, of course, is methane, going back to the story, right? So yes, that occurs. So have a look at that. I also invite you, I think in the state of Pennsylvania, I heard EQT spoke at CERAWeek when I was there. They're a big operator in the Northeast. They spoke about going back to all their operations and replacing all of their compressors to get to a very low leakage. So there is action that operators can take to get to the point of leaking less. And why would they do that? Is there's money to be made. Like companies, like I would have a look. EQT said for themselves, like they're making more money by fixing this leaking problem, right? So it's not a question of like, can they, should they? It's like, yes, and there's money to be made. And there's some examples out there. So I hope that extra context is useful. And I spoke about out of the ground, transmitting it. They're fugitives. Also, to be said, when you're producing natural gas as your dominant resource, there are going to be situations where in your separators, there's fugitive leakings. If you need to fix systems, you're generally going to close both ends, vent all of the gas in that system to go fix it because pressurized gas is a danger. So that's also going to be leaking. If your system can't actually handle moving the gas you produce, you might flare it, which means you burn the natural gas. And by burning it, you produce a chemical reaction that takes your methane, CH4, the molecule, and you convert it to CO2 and others, right? Which is a less potent greenhouse gas, which everyone says is better. At the end of the day, it's still greenhouse gas, but yes, it's converting it to something that has less of that blanketing effect. So all of these practices are ways that waste can occur within like getting it out of the ground to transmitting it. So these happen, right? So operators can reduce everything I spoke about, replacing equipment, reducing flaring, having better systems, flanges, valves, more modern systems, having the appropriate pipeline size to be able to move everything they produce. If they don't produce enough, what are they going to do with it? I can promise you they're not going to try to stick it in a pipe and create an overpressure system. So they're probably going to flare to vent it, right? So that situation can happen. So there's many ways that it can happen in that upstream.
I do want to
Moving
double
on,
tap that
Rob.
because it's such a counterintuitive point, Kevin, that you were just talking about. Like, usually we associate burning with negative, like once when something's getting burned, it's releasing carbon dioxide, and generally in the climate change space, burning is bad. Um, but it is the case with natural gas. Like once it's out of the ground, and it exists in the world, we do want it burned because carbon dioxide is such a less potent uh, climate change pollutant than methane, just pure methane. And so it's a counterintuitive thing. I remember when I first started working on methane topics, and people were showing me flares. I was like, oh God, those things look awful. You're just, burning, and it is awful because it is represents a waste, and it represents gas that's just going straight into the atmosphere rather than being used for anything. But it's also true that by burning it, it has become a less potent greenhouse gas, and it's just very counterintuitive. Obviously, in the long run, we'd like to be transitioning off of gas, but there is this odd thing where, as long as we have gas systems in place, we want the gas to make it somewhere where it gets burned once it comes out of the ground, and that's not something I think that's always intuitive.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought it up. I mean, it's important to make sure all these things are intuitive. So the thing to think about flaring is it's a practice that's been around for a while. You take the gas in the pipe, you ignite it, and by burning it, you do convert methane to CO2 and others and water, right? But there's also other effects, like, right, if you don't have the equipment in place, this goes back, Jim, to the kind of question and thing I spoke about earlier. If you don't have the pipeline size in place, if you don't have the separators in place, if you don't have a compressor station that can handle all this, you don't have the way to move that resource to the consumer. So what are you going to do? You might flare it, right? Vent it. So what Kayla said is true. It's not intuitive. Like, why does this exist? Well, there's a purpose, right? But it means that like it's an inefficiency. We can get better. We don't need to routinely flare if we have the right size piping and equipment. And the other aspects I want to call it flaring, just because I think it's useful. The act of flaring, yes, it's destructive, but it does a couple things. One, it's converting methane to CO2. Also, if you have a situation with hydrogen sulfide, which is deadly in human contact, if you flare that, you also, through the combustion, convert it to um, acid rain, SO2, and that is less deadly, but also not great, right? So the act of flaring can be considered like a last-ditch effort to do something good with a really bad situation you have, but it doesn't mean it's good. And all of these things, if you could have the right equipment in place, if you could reduce the amount of flaring or outright just get rid of it, right? It gets to the point where you don't have to deal with these conversations. So yes, better, not good. Thank you. Robin, I'm at your question. Do some of the larger companies lobby for the bomb rules because they had invested in methane capture equipment? I can't comment on that but from a scientific point of view, again, there's a lot of money to be made. This is a resource that we're pulling out of the earth in the oil and gas realm, right? If you can bottle it and sell it, you're going to make money. And if you don't, and someone can call you out, what they're calling out is that you're inefficient, you're just throwing revenue out the window, right? You're having an impact on the climate, you're having an impact on people that live around where you're at, right? So all of these things become evident when you provide the intelligence of this. Hey, you're wasteful and you're inefficient. Look at the data. Indisputable. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so Chris asked about other countries, and I'm going to hijack that question and say, so is there satellite mapping to show global methane emissions? And how does the US fare? I mean, are we better actors than some?
So yeah,
No?
good questions. I'm going to answer the first one, and then this. I think the first one will be more straightforward. So in terms of venting, flaring outside of the U.S., can this be observed? I'm going to expand the answer. Yes. So there are satellites that track for methane and flaring, and they look globally, and there's a lot of data to show that this is happening outside of the U.S. In terms of the magnitude of how much these occur, sometimes it could be larger, sometimes it could be lower. The problem with satellite is a satellite is looking at a point in time, and we don't have an infinite number of satellites looking for this. So you don't have a situation where you've measured everything. So it's an impossible thing to say without a doubt the US or is better or worse than this because we are measuring points in time that we can observe, but it doesn't mean we have the full picture. So yes, we can see outside the country. Now, is US better or worse? We are quite technologically advanced. We have the resources to ensure that we can turn inefficiencies into a situation where we can make money and be less inefficient, right? So we have the resources available. Um, the study that we have done, the quantification we've done, is just within the state of Texas comparative to global geopolitical situations. It's hard for me to say, are we better or worse? But again, we have the resources in place. We have the data, the intelligence that says how much we're wasting where. And if you think like, okay, so we know it where and how much, and we can equate it to like global disruptions, I think we have all the information we need to start acting. So whether we're better or worse than a neighbor doesn't excuse the question of like, should we already be acting and stop talking about like better or worse? Not to not answer your question, but I hope that gives some context. Jim, did that help or do you have a follow-up?
No, that's fine. That's great. Anything else? Any other questions? Just come off mute. Well, I just want to say thank you to our team from RMI. This has been great. We're recording this. I'll share it with everybody here, and Kevin's going to send me his slide deck
Yep.
and the links that we've shared today. And we'll put this on our Dirty Energy Team page. And I think Kevin offered to hook us up with a landfill expert, talk about specifically, methane emissions from landfills. We kind of have this discussion in Sierra Club all the time. Incinerators or landfills, right? And so there's kind of arguments on both sides. Yeah, so thank you all. And yeah, have a great weekend.
You're welcome. Thanks for the attention. Appreciate the work you're doing. I'm probably going to leave it to Kayla to organize people.
Yeah,
Circling back, I think she's better than that at me. Yeah,
Jim,
I
I'll
know.
connect you with our landfill team.
Yep. Jim, I'll send you the slides in just a few minutes. So thank you all.